Next, we're going to look ahead at building the future of Web3. And there's this great clip that's, I guess, kind of old at this point, of Microsoft's old CEO, Steve Ballmer, basically just sweatily screaming, developers, 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 over and over again. And he's basically just hammering how important they're going to be. And it's no different here in Web3. To talk more about that, we have Jonathan King and Brian Burns, who are both GT alum. Jonathan is a principal at Coinbase Ventures. And Brian is the co-founder and CTO at Giglabs, which is a platform that makes it easy for brands to create and distribute NFTs at scale. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for joining me here. So I know we talked about this earlier in like the VC panel with Peter and David, but gonna give a quick glimpse into, Coinbase Ventures thesis as it relates to developers, right? And so, how developers can build the future of Web3. And then we're gonna talk to, a fellow developer and, some of the things that they're doing in terms of, bringing tooling to the market to make it easier for enterprise brands to enter the space. So, overall, like from the Coinbase Ventures side, like our top level thesis is that, as Web3 gains momentum, we need more robust developer tools and infrastructure in order to unlock that next stage of Web3 innovation, right? We consider developers to be really the lifeblood of Web3 and a leading indicator in terms of how value will be created long term in the space. We'll talk a little bit more about like some of the numbers we're seeing from like, developers entering the ecosystem. Almost close to $10 billion in just the first half of 2022 alone has been invested into core infrastructure. And we're seeing this acceleration of like kind of top tier Web 2 talent, right? Kind of more traditional tech entering into the space. And then ultimately, and I think, what's going to be really unique, Brian here is going to kind of share some of the trends we're seeing as a lot of these companies are racing to incorporate Web3 capabilities into their products. And so we also go through like some of the key predictions for developer tooling. But before we kind of dive deep, a question for the audience, right? How many developers do you all think are in Web3 today? Just shout it out. 10? Okay. Wow. Very bleak. How many? 100,000. Okay. All right. Getting there. 15,000. Who said 300,000? All right. Okay, so let's zoom out. So how many developers do you think are in software development globally? Like, how many developers do you think are software devs today? Come on, give us some more credit, please. How many? 5 million, okay. Any other numbers? So globally, there's actually 31.1 million developers around the world, with JavaScript and Python taking up the lion's share of like the most popular programming languages. However, when you think about Web3 is actually less than 1% of developers globally. There was a study did last year by Electric Capital, which reported that the total number of monthly active developers in the ecosystem, and again, I caveat that this number is really based on, what we can see from like open source project commits on GitHub. That was roughly 18,000. The next iteration of that Electric Capital report will be coming out at the end of this year, and I'm really excited to see how those numbers trend. But there was a survey conducted by Stack Overflow around, what do developers think of Web3? And you can see a large majority, 37%, saying, what is Web3? And so that goes back to this ethos of, how do we get more education? We bring the community together, what we're doing now around Web3 ATL, and we broaden that general awareness of how you as an everyday user or developer can really participate in the ecosystem. I talked about this, I kind of made the statement earlier today, right? Prices are down, but devs are up. So this was a recent report that came from Alchemy, who's a large developer platform provider. They kind of show, like even despite Ethereum decreasing 70%, the amount of activity that's happening in terms of smart contracts that are being developed on the platform has actually increased by over 40%, right? Weekly downloads as it, kind of relates to Ether.js, Web.js, Web3.js is you can see like it's a, nice steady trend. So I think one of the things that excites me the most is that, despite the bear market, like developers are continuing to build some really amazing products within this space. And then, when you start zooming out, like, as we kind of think about like developers and the tooling, we almost think, okay, what is the core, kind of developer jobs to be done for Web3? And that really starts with a combination of, one, getting a base level of understanding of which, L1 or L2 you're planning to build on, but how do you connect to the network? How do you then, be able to, kind of query and index the data? You're then kind of writing smart contracts, private key management as it relates to, being able to kind of tokenize and wallet addresses, identity being a core piece as well, connecting on and off of fiat on-ramps. So like from an API, testing, of course, security, deployment, and then ultimately maintaining the application for the front user. And so this overall framework really, kind of shapes in terms of like our thinking for the Web3 developer landscape. And so I'll walk through that now. And just to caveat this, that this landscape is not mutually exclusive or completely exhaustive, right? I probably, as soon as I went out in the hallway, I met like 3 other companies that are building in the space. So I promise to add you to this list in the next iteration, okay? But really at the base layer of the Web3 developer stack is the protocols themselves, right? Like this is the underlying, kind of main blockchain architecture. You have your layer 1s, you have your layer 2s, which is more of an extension of the capability of that kind of base layer 1. So think about things like Arbitrum and Optimism and how they're kind of extending the scalability of Ethereum, and then bridges and swaps as protocols as well. On top of the protocols, what we've seen is really core infrastructure being built. And so the first step, again, if you think back to like that Web3 jobs to be done framework, node infrastructure provider, like that is really like your entry point to be able to connect to the blockchain and begin kind of extracting data to build for your application. Wallets and key management as it relates to, kind of providing visibility to the end user. Identity, decentralized identity becoming, something that is more critical. And then these kind of emerging concepts of, we've seen what has happened in Web 2 around cloud and, storage providers and how they are very centralized and there's this lack of trust around censorship, et cetera. And so emerging concepts around decentralized compute and storage and actually building those capabilities on top of the blockchain. The most diverse, and I would probably say dense layer, is the developer tooling, the developer tools themselves. And so how we think about like the developer tools is really, if I can simplify it, think about a Web3 dev journey, and that's from build, test, deploy, monitor. So what frameworks, developer frameworks will you use to write your smart contract? We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the low code and no code space and provide some examples there. Indexing the blockchain and getting data across multiple L1s, simulating how's your smart contract going to perform before it actually goes into production. I mentioned earlier about spending a lot of time in the application security space. So we're starting to see, because of the amount of hacks that have happened since 2020, $5 billion worth of cryptocurrency that's been stolen, there's now an abundance of data, right? And so how do you build threat intelligence on top of that data and then do more traditional things like operational security monitoring once your application has been deployed? Application monitoring as well. So, if you're familiar with a company called Datadog, for example, in the Web 2, this whole concept of observability, as some of these apps begin to grow and scale, and they might have like multiple node providers and multiple infrastructure primitives on the back end, how do you kind of manage like all of the connectivity and kind of get a really a strong understanding of the health and reliability of your application? And then finally, analytics, right? There's so many analytics providers, Dunes, the Nansons, Flipside, Cryptos of the world. But I would say what's the most exciting part of like this overall stack is app enablement. And so, you think about like the top use cases across Web3, GameFi, DAOs, DeFi, NFTs. There are some extraordinary founders in this particular segment that are building tooling to make it easier for brands or enterprises to begin onboarding to these different use cases. And so I think that's a really, really great transition. I know I've been talking a ton just to kind of give you all like just a general lay of the land, but I want to kind of like double click into the NFT NFT space, introduce Brian and his company Giglabs, who is building a platform called Gigantic here in Atlanta, and kind of give you an example of like a real world application and what they're doing. So Brian, why don't you start by just introducing yourself?
Sure. I am a co-founder and CTO of Giglabs. And before I dive into what Gigantic is, just a quick history on Giglabs, because it was that history that culminated into what Gigantic is today. So we started Giglabs back in 2017, at the end of 2017, and many of you may remember that was the start of the last bear market in crypto. And so maybe not the best time to start a company, but actually hindsight, it was a really great time to start, because everything that we built, it was done during that time. And so we were heads down building, no distractions. We had kind of a close community of people who were actually building and excited, not fly by night people. So it was a tight knit community, and that time period is when we made a lot of innovations. So we dabbled in almost everything. It was marketplaces, building wallets, building automated market maker contracts before Uniswap existed. Web3 games, and even VR and 3D gallery environments. That was one of our products called Rare Rooms. So, we dabbled in just about everything along the way. I was writing smart contracts, Ethereum smart contracts, and later Flow blockchain smart contracts. And, during that time, you had access to the standards writers. Everybody was working together, and so I worked on some standards, the composable smart NFT standard, ERC 998, one of the upgradable smart contract standards. It was ERC 1538 at the time, but then it became the diamond standard on Ethereum, 2535, things like that. So I was deeply, I was just learning, coding, and also heavily involved in the end product. I've got a big, heavy product background as well, so I'm a technically minded product founder. So anyway, all that to say, everything we learned, everything we were building turned out to, in 2021, when this, the rush came in of projects and brands wanting to launch NFTs, we were ready. So we platformized a lot of the learnings and the tech into Gigantic. We just rebranded to Gigantic. At that time, it was NFT Bridge. And we made it really easy for brands to onboard. So everything we learned, we had been working with a few big brands before that, but it was not using a platform approach, but we were learning what they needed. Enterprises need certain things that maybe smaller projects wouldn't need. So we built all that in as well. And so it's a no-code solution where you have end-to-end, top-to-bottom NFT project. So you can launch the website. It's hooked into the blockchain. It's spun up quickly, and it's got mechanisms for selling, minting, selling, and secondary marketplace capabilities right there on the brand site. So it's branded and makes it, it's an end-to-end solution. So everything on that slide previously, those 10 things that you have to do, we take care of that for the brand. Payments, wallets, all that stuff's in there, including credit card, payments as well. So, and one other thing, some of those projects that are listed there on the slide, they needed to do it NFTs at scale, right? UFC Strike, 600,000 NFTs. Everybody clicking the buy button at the same time. It's a really tough problem to solve, and so we kept improving it, scaling it up, horizontally scaled so that it really works well. But that's just a brief overview of Gigantic. I can talk about where we're going with it and the trends.
Well, I think like a couple of things that I heard, and like, obviously, Brian, you have like such an amazing background, but for some of the founders and builders in the room, I heard, you guys were, building all of these different solutions. You were, kind of connecting with customers and listening to their needs. Just curious, kind of thinking about some of the pivots you made along the way. Like, how did the customer discovery, listening to like the enterprise brands inform like the top problem statements that you wanted to address for the enterprise NFT segment?
Yeah, and I can use an example. One of our early brands back into 2019, beginning of 2020, partners was Turner Sports here in Atlanta, and we helped them build a blockchain gaming ecosystem called Blockleet Golf. Golf was the first one, but now they're developing other ones too. So they were kind of dabbling in the space and testing out Web3, and hey, could they make this a thing? So hey, NFT golfers and NFT, they're upgradable, right? So some of these things that we had already done with our game, we were implementing on their system. But what we learned was, okay, the things that we had in our Web3 game, which was a strategy, conquest, ancient Rome type game on the web, right? Web3. So what we learned was they require a lot more emphasis on data analytics, all of the things they needed to hook in to, it wasn't just Google Analytics they had to hook in. They had to hook in Web3 event. They needed to know when transactions were complete after a sale or whatever, but it had to be attributed. You had to make the bridge from Web 2 attribution. So if somebody clicks on a link in Twitter, it does the UTM code or however they want to attribute it, and then it has to go all the way through the purchase. And you need to be able to link that back when that Web3 event, when the Ethereum or Flow event comes up. You have to be able to tell Google Analytics, hey, the end-to-end transaction happened, the conversion happened, and they purchased whatever NFT. So that was one big thing. That just robust data and analytics type things was a big one. Security as well. So that's another one I'll mention because, when you've got people's NFT, these are things of value, currency, NFTs, and so you have to put a bigger emphasis on security, and they care a lot about that. So, setting up the wallet the first time for an enterprise and, even having them, put the seed phrase somewhere, it's actually a tough challenge to, they don't want to do that. They don't want to have to be in charge of that. So offloading that is a big deal. It's a big help as well.
Awesome. And I mean, it's absolutely incredible, hear about you all's story and like the number of brands in the enterprise space that you're working with. And of course, if we zoom out, look at larger trends, Starbucks announcing their new NFT loyalty program. I talked about earlier Reddit and the whole avatar, but NFT based, and several other companies. Like, why now? Why do you think like enterprises are racing to join Web3 at this time?
Yeah, there's technical advancements as well as just industry. So I'll start with the industry reasons. There are in 2021, NFTs were being used before that, but it was on a smaller scale. But when they had the art and collectibles explosion, and I think NBA Top Shot I think they were in full gear by January 2021, and that kind of helped as well. So it was sports moments, and I think that kind of proved out, okay, there's this initial early adopter. I call it like early adopter. There's so much more NFTs are going to be doing than just art and collectibles and video moments. So that kind of got them interested. They dabbled. They had their innovation departments, try their labs, trying things. Some of them, the ones that are a little more forward thinking. And so now they're seeing, okay, that collectibles art, it's not going anywhere, but there is this next thing that you can do with NFTs, which, we believe the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be used by legacy brands, big brands, to enable more engagement, activation, loyalty. And there's a lot of mechanisms you can do that with NFTs that you can't do today. So, and a technical trend, the biggest one. I mean, onboarding is getting better. It's not still people are a little skittish, mainstream people about storing, where's my NFT and all that, and how do I use this. But that's a lot better. These other low cost chain, the gas costs. Once there was viable L2 solutions. Polygon, Flow is an L1. We work on Flow heavily. Low gas costs, it's negligible. That makes it really easy to open up these new use cases instead of just these high value art cases that L1 Ethereum. It's good for very high value things and things you want to really secure. And but now you've got this explosion of layer 2s and other L1s like Solana, Flow, and that are really lower cost gas. And now you can have your reward program NFT or your coupon NFT and really distribute these things and get them into people's hands and then get them a wallet and all of that. So,
and I want to double click, I guess, in terms of like, what do you see as like the future trends or those next set of use cases for NFTs? Right now, you're right. Like a lot of the NFTs is around like kind of artwork. We also see like music in the space, but I've been seeing things like, composable dynamic NFTs for like trait swaps and, the X NFTs, executable NFTs. So just curious to get your thoughts on the future of NFTs, especially as it relates to enterprises.
Yeah, so you're going to see a wide range of use cases: music, gaming, metaverse, all of that. We all know that. And those are engagement plays. Where we see it with, especially with brands, and the brands we're talking to, is you have this huge unlock that I think happened this year. You could do it before this year, but this year is when you really saw the unlock of being able to authenticate that somebody owns an NFT in real life. So, if somebody has an NFT, a Bored Ape or something like that, and they go to an event, they'd have I think last year you'd have a paper printout of the wallet addresses, and you had to have a snapshot ahead of time, and it was a big ordeal. Now you can do it in real time, in person, and we partnered with a company called Token Proof that they've got an app and you can have your phone right there. I can have mine, and you can verify. You can scan a QR code and verify that I own this NFT. That's a huge, huge unlock. There's so many applications of that beyond just getting into an event. Tickets, of course, but NFTs now that can have access to discounts, point of sale rewards, loyalty cards. All of those things are now, that's what we're going to see over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's, we're calling gigantic. We used to call it the Squarespace for Web3 about a year ago. Now it's it's an engagement platform, NFT, a Web3 engagement platform, because the NFT is just like it's a huge new tool for marketing organizations, especially in enterprises.
Awesome. And so now I think, I think the overall ethos is that, Brian and I are super excited about supporting developers, right? Developers truly are the future of Web3. It's very critical for, new forms of tooling and infrastructure premises to be introduced into this ecosystem if we're going to see, the number of applications that are needed on the blockchain really drawing that mass adoption of users. And so I think before we wrap, I'd love to take some questions from the audience.
My name is Christian, working on a product called Campini. It's like an NFT-based game. We're based here in Atlanta. Dynamic NFTs, we're really, really interested in this. And 2 questions we had was we were struggling with a layer 1 chain to pick. So with Flow, I know it has some stuff with dynamic NFTs, but we were kind of biasing towards Solana. The other question was, it's really hard to get talent in this space, so we really love no-code tools. And do you know of any no-code tools around dynamic NFTs? Thanks.
Yeah, and so, no, that's cool. We'll talk about your game after this. But Flow versus Solana. So I know a lot more about Flow, and I can tell you, yes, it's a good platform for that kind of thing. And in fact, if you look at it as just updating the metadata or part of the metadata, you can have a frozen part of the metadata and an unfrozen, a dynamic part, and you've got a really dynamic. You can do anything with that. You can upgrade the game asset. You can do whatever you want. And that's in fact how we did it in 2018 with one of our games, but it was a lot harder. And the other thing about Flow is you can upgrade the contracts pretty easily. So that I'd say the low gas environment, the onboarding with Flow, but I think the wallets are a little better on Flow. If again, I don't know Solana terribly well as far as like are there new wallets that are really that match like the Dapper wallet, for instance, or something like that, where it's just so seamless. And my mom uses it, and so I think what was the second part of your question? Yeah, I mean, you could use our platform for that, for instance. But yeah, it's just updating the metadata with the tool. And that's something you can do. Do you know?
Yeah, I think on the dynamic side, so I know of two. They're still in stealth. So I can't say the name. I do think there's like a plethora of no-code tooling in Web3. I probably have seen hundreds of them in the space. But as we kind of look in the space, we look for those type of platforms that are more use case driven, that are going something after like the enterprises, while also the retail user space is interesting because I think you'll see there will be some tools that will emerge, but I also think like some of the larger marketplace providers will just start exposing those tools. So very similar like what Instagram will be releasing very, very soon. So I think it's an interesting space that's developing. I think based on where we are today, though, like there's probably more need for hardcore infrastructure to kind of get the more senior developers in the space first. And then over time, as things become easier for that class of developers, I think we'll see, the use cases they'll mature to the point where they can be templatized to be more applicable to like no code, low code tooling long term.
Interoperability and bridges. It's a big focus in terms of risk. What do you see the role in terms of capital, and where do you see the role of interoperability in terms of the entrepreneur things, and how we'll build a safer bridge in the future?
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess, like capital as it relates to interoperability, this is probably an area I'm very excited about. I think that we need better security tooling in Web3 all up, right? So what has happened over the past kind of 2.5 years with the 5 billion in hacks that we've seen. Now we have the data where we can build better threat intelligence, where you can be, the frameworks can improve before you actually deploy that new smart contract on chain, as well as post deployment, we can do better operational security monitoring. And so I'm getting the sign that, our time is up. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And, shout out to the Blockchain Club for organizing this amazing conference. Thank you.
Thank you.